Mars One will establish human settlement on Mars in 2023. In that year, the first group of 4 humans will land on Mars.
Yes, the good old story of the Mars One project. I first learned about Mars One back in 2015 when a finalist of their astronaut selection gave a presentation about the initiative at my school. There were some students interested and some remaining skeptical about the project, but what mattered the most was that everyone was treating it somewhat seriously. What made us respect the company was the huge excitement of the astronaut candidate, whose name I'm not sure I can state. Theoretically he was active online, but that was a while ago. The passion with which he was talking about the plans to send humans to Mars was truly mesmerizing, and I'm sure that he inspired many young students. Back then it seemed that Mars One was everywhere. The internet was full of clips of the CEO of the company, Mr. Buzz Lansdorp, and the 100 finalists of their astronaut selection process, explaining the project to the masses. The television also did not miss this trend, ramping up the hype cycle to humongous levels. However, time flew by and there was no new information about the project. The plans of the company were delayed and then delayed again, and finally in 2019 it had declared bankruptcy. What happened to Mars One? Was it truly a scam? When did things go south? How was SpaceX involved? Those are questions I will be answering with this video. Since the video ended up being quite long, there are timestamps in the description. Let's start by taking a step back and looking at what the company promised to achieve. From day one, which by the way was in 2011, the goal of Mars One was clear: to establish a permanent human settlement on Mars. They knew that achieving this feat would be extremely difficult and costly, but claimed to have found a way to make it feasible. All Mars plans so far consisted of 3 difficult parts. First, you need to send your astronauts there, but we have already sent probes to Mars, which makes this a bit easier. After this long journey, the astronauts need some place to stay on the red planet, different from their cramped spacecraft. Lastly, they need a vehicle to return home. This vehicle of course requires fuel, which would most probably be manufactured on site, which is a significant problem. Mars One noticed that they could bring their plan much closer to reality by simply skipping the last part, returning home, and offered one-way tickets to Mars to those brave enough. That way, they would focus on 2 major technological challenges, creating a transfer vehicle for the crew and the base itself. The rest, like Mars suits and rovers, would be very much based on the existing technologies, reducing the costs. Or at least that's what they said. Their first time frame for their plans was as follows. In 2016 they would send a communication satellite to Mars's orbit. At the same time they would start simulated Mars outposts on Earth for training, technology tryouts and evaluation in general. In 2018 a rover would have been sent with the purpose of finding the best location for the settlement. 2020 would be the year of a multitude of missions, sending the living units, life support units, another rover, and some other miscellaneous supplies. The rover would prepare the base for the astronauts, which interestingly includes inflatable units, similar to the ones which were being developed by Bigelow Space and are by Sierra Space. In September 2022, the crew would leave for Mars in the newly developed transfer vehicle, and they would arrive in 2023. This is one of the parts when SpaceX would come in. Firstly, it is likely that most of those missions would be completed with the Falcon Heavy, and secondly, Mars One considered using the SpaceX Red Dragon capsule to land their astronauts. This capsule was originally proposed in 2011 for a potential NASA Discovery mission, but did not receive any funding. SpaceX was developing it from its own funds until 2017, when Elon Musk announced that its development will be halted and the resources moved to Starship. Who knows, perhaps if Mars One succeeded, it would have been the vehicle to land the first humans on Mars, but it's in the past now. Through the next years, the company would expand the colony, bringing in more equipment and astronauts. After hearing this extremely ambitious plan, the next logical question is the funding of the project. Let's just have the CEO explain it.
We will finance this mission by creating the biggest media event ever around it. Everybody in the world can see everything that will happen in the preparations and on Mars.
Sounds cool. Of course, private investors would also be needed, but let's leave that for now. What is the price tag? Mars One completed their own assessment of the funding needed and came up with the figure of $6 billion for sending the first 4 people to Mars. Here is the breakdown of the main costs. Addressing this number is very hard though. It is on the low end when it comes to the cost of space programs, however in terms of startups it is absolutely colossal. Gathering even $450 million for the first unmanned lander would be amazing. But before diving deeper into all of the numbers and proposals, let's leave the fairyland and see what the company actually managed to deliver. For the first years, Mars One mostly went under the radar, until 2013 when they started making news all over the world. This sudden uproar was a result of a brilliant decision, which was supposed to help reach interested investors. This year, the company started their first stage of the astronaut application, and as part of it, the candidates were to publicly post a video of them answering prepared questions. Soon, the internet went wild with the videos about Mars, and the public media were quick to catch up on that trend, reporting on Mars One with much praise for the project and interviewing the bold candidates. The fact that this was a one-way mission helped grab the attention of the viewers, spreading the information, boosting Mars One merchandise sales, and helping reach potential investors. But with this increased interest, some huge inconsistencies started appearing. There was lots of opposing information regarding how many people applied. Some media outlets spread the news that it was above 200,000, some were more conservative, keeping the number at 100,000. The company did not clear up any of those estimates. It was good for them to keep it ambiguous. Later, the NBC reported that they counted 2,782 applicants with public videos, but the number might be different, with some applicants being allowed to keep their videos private. Then Mars One site was updated with a sentence that stated that the total number of completed and submitted applications was 4,227, much lower than the previously mentioned 200,000. Either way, the application helped Mars One gather an undisclosed at the time amount of much needed funds, which were to be spent on research into technologies required for the project and the next astronaut application stages. For the next year, not many new details were released about the project. The CEO of the company, Mr. Buzz Lansdorp, was appearing at many events, using his public speaking skills to attract investors, but the talk would always be the same, about the vision of Mars One rather than any tangible actions undertaken. This would be the case until the very end of the company. And when I'm saying many events, I really mean it. You can see in this calendar he would appear somewhere every other week. Hell, his site even has a dedicated button saying "Book Buzz Lansdorp" as a keynote speaker. October of 2014 was not good for the company, as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the legendary MIT, released a very damning report on the feasibility of the project. Although this not make huge news, since it is much easier to report on easy slogans like "one-way ticket to Mars," the report would haunt Mars One in the next years, as every potential investor would inevitably stumble upon it. They had to face criticism of the scientific community before, but this wasn't just one sentence of disapproval, but a full investigation into all the flaws of the idea. In 2015, the company finished the next stage of the astronaut selection, which started a new round of media interest. The number was now reduced to 100 finalists, who were encouraged to give out as many interviews as possible. They were very good at this since all of them were huge space enthusiasts with very interesting personalities, spreading the excitement through the public. Mars One was also eager to mention that they have ordered different research reports from companies like Paragon Space Development Corporation and Lockheed Martin about the systems the colony will need, to be released soon. But after every positive interview, a reflection from potential investors had to come. This company has basically already missed all their deadlines and had to move them. And on top of that, many respectable scientists were stating that it was unreasonable to think that they can ever succeed. In the original plan, they were to already send a satellite to Mars next year, while in reality they were busy giving TED Talks and only started proper assessment of their needs. The facts were that Mars One was running short on cash, and big investors had no interest in them. It did not matter that all of the impressions of regular people about them were positive, due to the astounding ignorance of the popular media. Every respectable investor, after doing research, would realize that the ambitions of the company were far too big for their capabilities. Although Mars One planned to get a lot of funding from companies willing to record and broadcast its journey, they struggled to find anyone interested in paying to cover it, as to attract such funding they would have to prove some capabilities, which they simply could not afford. But then, in 2016, Mars One seemingly found a solution to its huge fundraising problems. There is a well-known and often used solution to a situation when no big investors are interested in your company. You have to open up to smaller bidders, ones who do much less research since their stakes are also smaller and are much more likely to react based on feelings, which Mars One was pretty good at controlling. They wanted to go public. There were, however, two significant issues with this solution. Firstly, when you are public, you also need to be more upfront with your finances, which is not preferable. And secondly, getting accepted to a stock exchange can be tedious, long, and expensive, all of which would be unacceptable. Since this was the only, even a bit realistic option for the company to have a chance of realizing its vision, they went with this plan. And this is when we learn about the finances of Mars One. Since the founding back in 2011, all the way to 2016, Mars One has collected about $1 million. Let me repeat so there is no misunderstanding. Just $1 million. This mostly came from their merchandise sales, donations, and astronaut applications, which came with a small fee. But for those who are not into startups or any sort of businesses, let's compare that to another project which was gathering funds at the time. Star Citizen is a video game set in space which was looking for funds at Kickstarter at roughly the same time. Incredibly, by 2013, it had managed to raise over $9 million. If you think that it is a lot in comparison, a year later, Star Citizen raised $40 million through their own website. This means that a video game about wars in space has raised at least 40 times more money in the similar time frame as Mars One, a company which wanted to actually go to space and establish a permanent colony on Mars. In fact, in the next years, Star Citizen only gained more funding, raising over $395 million at the time of writing. It is one of the most successful fundraising campaigns, yet it is still less than the $450 million Mars One needed for their first mission alone. It is incredible that Mars One managed to stay afloat for 5 years on $1 million and appear in so many news outlets. The cost of travel, renting out office space, and paying the staff, small stuff but still, can often add up to much more than that. But brushing this incredibly damaging fact aside for now, let's look back at the issue of entering the stock market. There still was a glimmer of hope that a successful campaign would encourage more serious investment in the company after all. A respectable stock exchange would likely not let a company with finances like that to be traded, but there exists a great backdoor, which is sometimes used: a merger. And Mars One found a great company to merge with. They were called Infin Innovative Finance AG. Based in Switzerland, the company was one of the first to enter the mobile payment market, but was crushed by the competition from companies like Apple, Google and Samsung, which entered this market soon after. What does a finance company have to do with Mars exploration, you might ask? Well, absolutely nothing, besides the fact that it was listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange and could allow Mars One easy access. And so the two companies merged, creating the publicly traded Mars One Ventures. Soon, Mars One could publish a good message for everyone interested. They have managed to gather a staggering $10 million in their first round of funding. In the official statement, they were happy to explain that this money allowed them to hire more staff, issue more contracts, and continue on with the astronaut selection process, perhaps even starting the training. But let's look back for a second. Although it is true that this was 10 times the funds gathered before, their original estimate, which was also cited for being too low, stated that at least $450 million will be needed for the first mission alone. This fact did not go over the head of the shareholders, and the stock price of Mars One Ventures went on a path of steady decline, as everyone slowly was realizing that this is the end of the story. The company did not raise much more and started fading away from the public's eyes. Even the frequent appearances of CEO Bas Lansdorp at different conferences did not help, as he could only sell the same idea as he has been for the last 4 years. Finally, in January of 2019, Mars One Ventures was declared bankrupt, unable to pay its obligations with less than $25,000 in its accounts. A truly tragic end to a story that inspired so many people. Although it seemed like the final bankruptcy was a surprise to no one following the events, many people actually believed that Mars One was a real thing, going to send real people to Mars. The most vocal from this group of people were some of the astronaut candidates of the program. To this day, there are numerous videos defending the venture on YouTube. Even this year, I stumbled upon someone defending Mars One on a live stream. It is quite easy to say that Mars One could have succeeded if only it had enough investors and if only those petty scientists kept quiet, however ridiculous this statement may be. But the truth is that no matter from which direction you looked at that company, there were some pretty apparent red flags. Let's have a look now at just some of them. One of the most important elements of every startup company looking to obtain funding is its team. If the investors don't have physical proof of capabilities, the best thing they can rely on is the trust towards the leadership, which actually knows what they are doing. A great example of that could be Axiom Space, a company developing a commercial extension to the ISS, which will serve as a separate station later on. They are yet to present any sort of space capabilities, but they are widely trusted because their team is made of people with extensive experience in the space industry. Many of them worked on the ISS project for years. Now let's go over the 5 people central to the Mars One project, as stated on their website, starting with the CEO, Bas Lansdorp, who is most probably the most known person from the company, as he was the one to always appear at public events. A quick look at his LinkedIn explains a lot. For the positive, he has got a title of a mechanical engineer, but to be frank, it is not that extraordinary for a CEO. After his studies, he worked on wind power generation for his PhD, and then started a company centered on this concept, which is great. But in 2011, he left the company, which had 8 employees at the time, and created Mars One. This means that he has never worked on any kind of real space project before, and Mars One was his first contact with the industry. Then we have the co-founder and the CTO, Arno Wilders. I can't deny him his experience. He has worked on many amazing and important space projects, which could have some applications for Mars One. But there is one significant issue with his participation in the project. He was never truly committed to the company, and never resigned from his position at the European Space Agency, splitting his time. Fun fact, he works at ES Tech in the Netherlands. Next to their headquarters is a space expo I made one of my shorts at. Unsurprisingly, he seemed usually absent from the company. It is not possible to combine being the person responsible for the technologies to go to Mars and work a second job on top of that, not to mention the other projects. Next up is the Chief Medical Officer, Norbert Kraft. I won't spend much time on him, he seems very qualified for what he was tasked with, developing the astronaut selection process. But the importance of his role in the success of Mars One seems to greatly diminish when taking the events that took place into consideration. His input was most important in the later rounds of the selection. The first two were just a general form to fill and a short interview. Before he had a chance to fully design the third round, which he was describing on stage in 2016, the CEO has already kind of admitted that the candidates are unlikely to fly, which I'll discuss soon, making his input obsolete. Then we had the mission concept artist Brian Vashtek. Although I don't doubt his artistic skills, the visuals don't determine if the company will succeed. If he is in the top 5 people in the company they wanted to mention, this raises some concerns. And finally there is the senior marketing strategist Casey Frank, also an individual experienced in his field, but he struggles with the same problem as the CTO. The whole time he was also an executive vice president / owner of another company called Disk Corporation, where he works to this day as per his LinkedIn. Moreover, in his description, he says that he provided only consulting services to Mars One. In summary, the team consisted of the CEO, who has not worked in the industry before, 2 people working full-time in other organizations, a specialist who would be needed only when the program is successful, and a concept artist. If the fact that even the CTO is not fully committed to the project is not a major red flag, then I don't know what is. Next up, you have the previously mentioned shenanigans with the misinformation about the number of applicants for the project. Even in the limited number of things that the company was actually doing, they were not straightforward at all, leading to negative feedback and distrust. After this, Mars One had another controversy regarding a media training video that they have released, which was later deleted from their YouTube channel. In it, a life coach was instructing the candidates on giving interviews, clearly showing how to avoid situations when the host suggests that the mission might be impossible. Although this is not inherently wrong, it demonstrates that there were questions that Mars One would rather not answer. Sometime later, the Medium released an article critical of Mars One written by Elmo Keep, which pointed out the flaws with the program. A negative article is definitely not a red flag in itself, but the response of the company definitely was. They released a sort of a rebuttal video to YouTube in the form of a staged interview in which the CEO addresses chosen points from the article. The red flag was that his responses were so obviously manipulative and untrue sometimes that it was like a welcome letter for the Medium to write a follow-up article, which they obviously did, debunking everything Mr. Lansdorp said. You can find both articles and the video in the description. In this rebuttal, the preliminary studies about the feasibility of the technologies required, made by Paragon Space and Lockheed Martin, are mentioned. In fact, they were often given as proof that Mars One is actively working on the project with their commercial partners. The thing is that all of the 3 studies conducted for Mars One are available online to read, and they don't spark optimism. They are about 40-page reads, mostly about previous solutions and new issues to be solved for Mars. One even suggests at the end that more in-depth conceptual designs development is needed before even considering starting the next phase of all of those novel technologies. If after 5 years of existence the company only managed to produce this much, how can one believe they are serious about putting people on another planet? not to mention all of the ethical and legislative problems of doing so. The project existed in the grey area of the decisions from the Outer Space Treaty, and it is likely that no nation would want to undermine it. But even if we ignore all of the mentioned red flags for a while, then there still is one more so powerful that it discriminates this project completely. This ultimate blow towards the credibility of Mars One was dealt in a debate hosted at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. in 2015. You might remember the feasibility assessment made by MIT, which cost Mars One a lot of trouble in 2014. In a similar fashion as with the article by The Medium, Mars One decided to respond to the assessment and took part in a debate titled "Is Mars One feasible?" against two representatives from MIT. Since I'm mentioning it, you can probably already predict how this debate turned out for Mars One. The event was introduced by the legend himself, the president of Mars Society, Robert Zubrin, a very respected figure in the field whose activities are worthy of a video of its own. The MIT side came first, armed with charts and graphs and data and PowerPoint, as reported by thespacereview.com, whose summary of the debate you can also find in the description. If I were to mention all of the arguments from MIT graduate researchers, this video would be much longer than it already is, but some of them are especially noteworthy. One line of attack were the cost predictions made by Mars One, which were absolutely unrealistic. Virgin Galactic and the Curiosity rover were cited as examples of projects which in theory are simpler than what Mars One wanted to achieve and still consumed humongous amounts of funds. Then the opposition took apart the notion of Mars One being a cost-optimized project by showing that making it a one-way trip makes it in fact much more expensive. There are just so many systems which would be unnecessary if astronauts were to return home. It is unthinkable that having them stay on Mars would bring any kind of benefits. The company would also have to continuously support the colony for years to come, which is in absolute opposition of their whole business model. Mars One claimed that they will get the funds by organizing a huge media event, but it would be a one-off, while for the project the flow of money would need to be constant. What would happen if they run out of money? The astronauts would simply die. Then there also were all the issues mentioned in the original report from 2017, which were never addressed by Mars One. Anyway, the form of the conversation was a debate, so naturally the Mars One team had an opportunity to defend their project with their best arguments. It consisted of Buzz Lansdorp and Barry Finger, who is the chief engineer and director of life support systems at Paragon Space. And so Barry Finger took the stage for the ultimate defense and admitted that most of the points made by the team from MIT are true. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard me right. There was absolutely no way he could contradict any of the points made against Mars One, because they were simply objectively true. He even said that he had been making many of those same points to Lansdorp himself, the person responsible for the design of the base for the project, admitted it is unrealistic. Can we get it more straightforward than that? After him it was Lansdorp's turn, and to no one's surprise, he also could not defend the project. Not only that, but he also said many things dooming the project even further. His reason why the plan made no sense was that they were never going to use this plan to go to Mars. He admitted that their team does not have the skills necessary to make such a plan, and they will hire somebody to develop it for them, which he estimates will cost about $15 million. Let me remind you that at the same time Mars One has barely gathered $1 million. This contradicted anything the company has ever put out. Why would they host astronaut recruitment, making people decide on leaving their families for a de facto suicidal venture if they did not even have a plan of action? Trying to defend his ideals, Lansdorp said that they were signing to undisclosed companies for small cultural projects, and here a very important statement was made. Those are signs of success because Mars One is not simply about engineering, but spreading a broad message to the public about the importance of settling Mars. This statement leads to a conclusion which has been on my mind for a while. It seems that the goal of Mars One was never to colonize Mars, but to bring attention to the need of colonizing Mars. It's a good dream to have, but actively deceiving hundreds of people is definitely not the right way to do it, and all of the attention it brings is rather negative. Moreover, this is an outright admission that sadly settling Mars was not the primary goal. Lastly, according to the spacereview.com, Lansdorp also suggested that we live in a world of surprises, so perhaps some multi-billionaire will give Mars One the necessary $6 billion. The question remaining is, why would anyone do that instead of forming a new team for the cause? After all, Mars One has literally not done anything of substance. Looking back at all of the red flags, it is really hard to defend Mars One. Perhaps the most significant of them was the untrustworthy leadership, which was there since day one. The other ones were appearing as time went by, being the multiple news reports with wrong information, suspicious activities surrounding the astronaut selection, the vagueness of plans and released publications, ethical dilemmas, and the general disapproval of scientific community. Then all of the appearing concerns were confirmed by the company itself during a debate with MIT. However, the same debate hinted that Mars One really had another goal of raising awareness about Mars, which could be considered a more noble one. Keeping that in mind, it is time to ask the big question: was Mars One a scam? Since there seems to be some disagreement online whether Mars One was really a scam, let's try to look into this issue. A lot of people are saying that Mars One failed only because it did not manage to secure enough funding, and that if only they had found the investors, they would have definitely succeeded. The harsh reality, however, is that there was absolutely no plausible way Mars One could gather even close to the funding required and then solve all of the engineering challenges. The people working on it, like the CTO Arno Wilders, were knowledgeable enough to realize that, and this is why they did not fully commit. In the midst of the astronaut selection, it was easy to forget about all of the problems with the company. From the perspective of the candidates, it felt real. They were talking to real people, deciding on their fate and going through long application, which can justify the dedication and support from some of them. Just imagine how hard of a decision it had to be for many of them to commit to leaving your family forever and abandoning the human society that we have here on Earth. There are immense psychological implications of such decisions, and it is understandable that all of this pressure could blind the candidates and make them gloss over the obvious inconsistencies. The consensus among the scientific community is that Mars One would never work out, and no dreams of the CEO presented on the stage can change that. Then comes the argument that Mars One wasn't a scam because it did not really steal money from people. The funds were invested into research and allowed the team to travel to all of the events they were giving speeches at to obtain funding. This argument, however, is very sensitive to the definition of scam used. If it is only about making money illegally of someone, then sure, in theory the sales and investments were legal and not stealing per se. But most of the uses of the word scam also refer to an act of deceit, like fooling everyone who gets involved. In that case, there is absolutely no denying that the company was trying to scam potential investors. As revealed in the debate with MIT in 2016, they did not have any real plans and were not competent to make them, which is not an assumption I make, but a fact from the CEO himself. At the same time, they were all over the news and events making huge claims about their progress and making promises that they had no way of fulfilling, fooling everyone into believing that they would actually fly. Then they called giving them money an investment, fully knowing that in reality it is just a donation. No matter the final intentions of the people involved, the fact is that they were lying to everyone, and in this case the goal did not justify the means used. Lastly, there is an argument that was coming up again and again that the real goal of Mars One was most likely not going to Mars, but bringing attention to the general public about the fact that we need to go there. But does it really make any sense? I would argue that few people actually changed their views on the importance of colonizing Mars thanks to the company, and many actually lost faith in such programs after learning that it got nowhere close to reaching that goal. Moreover, the ambitions and dreams of many were hurt in the process. When I learned about the bankruptcy of the company, I remembered the astronaut candidate who visited my school, which I mentioned at the beginning of this video. This made me quite sad. His passion for space was something to adore. He was ready to give up on his life to explore another world and was excited about the project so much that he delivered almost 60 public speeches about the human mission to Mars, spreading his positive energy. People like him were deceived by the company, which first teased them with the opportunity to realize their dreams only to abandon them. Keeping all of this in mind, I have no restriction to say that yes, Mars One was a scam, and if you're still not willing to agree with that, just listen again to Chris Hadfield saying it.
Mars One was a scam.
When I started writing the script for this video, I could not say with 100% certainty that this is the end of the story. Yes, the non-profit has been dormant for over 3 years already, but there still was the slightest chance that they might do something new. But then, when I was finishing the script, it finally became unquestionable. The saga has ended. Sometime in between the 8th and 10th of November 2021, Mars One updated their website, making previous content unavailable, leaving a message about their journey, how they failed to raise funds, and how humans are explorers by nature. This is also why for some of the links in the description you will need to use the Wayback machine from the Internet Archive. Luckily, the Mars One site has been archived a lot, so it is possible to access the original. Overall, Mars One was a scam that was selling the dream of reaching Mars in a very aggressive timeline. Although it gained a lot of traction, it never managed to raise enough funding for even a single mission, as the potential investors saw through the lies being spread about the project. As for whether they helped the cause of reaching Mars, I think that the words of Dwayne Day are very on point. They have certainly brought a lot of attention to the cause of settling Mars, but they haven't exactly raised the quality of the discussion. Now that Mars One is officially no more, we can fully shift the focus to other ventures, like the optimistic yet more probable plans of SpaceX. Thanks for watching the whole video, it definitely is on the longer side. If you enjoyed the content, remember to like and subscribe. In the description you can find interesting links to stuff related to Mars One. I especially recommend watching the comedy bit. Also, feel free to check out my other videos. That's all I've got for you today. See you on Mars.